The first scream reached her before the light did, a thin, splintering sound that seemed to crawl along the stone and wood and rusted iron of the place until it found her ears and settled there. And in that instant, Althea Marrow knew that whatever world she had belonged to before, the salt wind off the Aegean coast, her mother's hand smelling of figs and olive oil, the way the sun once fell soft and gold against whitewashed walls, had been sealed behind her like a door nailed shut from the outside, because this place did not wake with birds or bells, but with human voices breaking apart under fear. And as dawn leaked into the slave market of Delos, it did so not as mercy, but as exposure, revealing rows of cages and platforms slick with old blood, the chalky dust of the yard stirred by boots and hooves, and the hard-eyed men who owned the morning. And Althea stood barefoot on splintered planks with an iron ring biting into her wrist, her ankles swollen from the march, her dress torn. Down one side, her hair a dark rope, down her back tangled with dirt and sweat, and she told herself she would not cry. Not yet, because tears were a currency here, and she did not know their price, only that everything was for sale. Even silence, even breath, even the memory of who you had been, and around her the other women stood in varying states of collapse and defiance. Morella with her jaw set like stone though her eyes trembled, Yara whispering prayers in a language that did not belong to. This land, Sophia staring straight ahead, as if the horizon itself might crack open and swallow her. And Althea felt the slow burn of anger rise beneath the fear, a quiet, dangerous heat, because she had not been taken by fate or storm, but by men who had watched her and decided she could be owned. Men who had dragged her from a fishing village and sold her body across water and desert until Delos rose out of the dust like a wound that never closed. A frontier town stitched together by greed and gunfire where the law was a suggestion and the market was the altar. And as the bell rang, a dull iron sound that vibrated in her bones, she remembered her father's voice telling her that a person's worth was not what others paid, but what they refused to surrender. And she clung to that thought like a hidden blade as the buyers began to circle, their shadows long and crooked in the early light, their eyes moving over skin and teeth and posture with the same cold appraisal they gave horses. And a man with a scar like a lightning strike down his cheek stopped in front of her, lifted her chin with a finger, and smiled as if pleased by the way she did not look away, because even here, even now, she would not give him the satisfaction of lowered eyes. And when he laughed and moved on, she felt the breath she had been holding slide out of her in a shaky line, replaced by a deeper dread as the auctioneer climbed his platform, a thick-necked brute with a voice trained to carry, and a whip coiled. At his side, not for use but for reminder, and he began to speak of origins and ages and strengths as if reciting a ledger, his words falling over the women like dirt, and Althea realized with a sick clarity that the true cruelty was not the chains or the marches or the nights of hunger, but this reduction, this stripping away of story, until all that remained was flesh measured against coin, and as bids were shouted and hands raised, she felt time stretch and warp, each moment an eternity, each breath an act of will. And she thought of the sea again, not as escape, but as witness, because water remembered everything. And if she survived, she would carry this place inside her like a scar, and if she did not, then at least the sea would know her name, and the first woman was led away. Then another, the clank of chains punctuating the auctioneer's chant, and when Morella's turn came, she fought, a sudden, desperate eruption of movement that sent a ripple through the crowd, her nails drawing. Blood from a handler's face before a rifle butt struck her down, and the sound of that impact echoed through Althea's chest, a reminder of the cost of resistance. And yet something in her stirred, because even broken resistance was still resistance. And as Morella was dragged off, limp and bleeding, Althea locked that image away, not as a warning, but as a vow. And the sun climbed higher, burning off the cool of morning, and replacing it with a harsh, merciless glare, sweat trickling down her spine, dust sticking to her skin. And she wondered how many mornings like this the town had seen, how many lives had begun and ended on these boards, and whether Delos itself was aware of the weight it carried. And then a hush fell. Not complete, but enough to feel. And a man stepped forward who did not shout or boast or jostle for position. A man dressed in plain, dark clothes with a hat pulled low, his boots worn but clean, his presence quiet in a way that bent the air around him, and Althea felt something shift, not hope exactly, but attention, because he did not look at the women as inventory, but as if each face told a story he was trying to read, and when his gaze met hers, it lingered, not with hunger or amusement, but with something harder to name, a shadowed recognition that made her pulse quicken despite herself, and she hated that reaction even as she could not stop it. Because here any interest was dangerous, and the auctioneer's voice rose again, announcing her lot, speaking her age with casual authority, misnaming her homeland, praising her strength as if it were a tool, and the bidding began slow, then faster, numbers climbing, and Althea's thoughts scattered like startled birds, fragments of memory and resolve colliding, because she knew that whoever bought her would own her days and nights, her labor and body, and she felt the old fear claw up her throat again. And she forced it down by fixing her gaze on a knot in the wood beyond the crowd, a small, stubborn thing that had survived countless feet and blows, and she told herself she would be like that, knot, embedded, unbroken, and when the scarred man raised his hand again, she felt a spike of panic. But then the quiet man spoke, his voice low but carrying, and the number he named silenced the others, a sum that drew murmurs and grudging respect, and the auctioneer grinned, sensing profit, and called for more. But none came, and the bell rang, and the sound cut through her like a blade, because just like that, with a noise and a nod, her fate had tilted, and as the handler unlocked her chain from the rail and pulled her forward, she stumbled, catching herself, and for a moment the world narrowed to the pressure of iron and the heat of the sun and the steady presence of that man walking beside her, close enough that she could smell dust and leather and something else beneath it, something clean. And she wondered who he was and why he had paid so much, and what kind of future waited at the end of his road. And when they reached the edge of the yard, he stopped, turned to her, and for the first time spoke directly to her, not about her, but to her, asking her name, and the simple dignity of the question nearly undid her, because names were power, and giving it felt like surrender, but withholding it felt like erasure. And she stood there, the noise of the market swelling behind her, the sun high and pitiless above, the weight of chains still on her wrist, and she realized that whatever she chose in that moment would echo forward, shaping the days to come. And she opened her mouth, the taste of dust and fear and defiance on her tongue, knowing that beyond this answer lay a path she could not yet see. And the man waited, his eyes steady, the market breathing around them, and somewhere behind her another bell began to ring. She gave him her name at last, not as a plea but as a statement. Althea Marrow spoken into the dust with a steadiness that surprised even her, and the man nodded as if receiving something entrusted rather than taken, introducing himself simply as Elias Crow, a name that carried no flourish and promised none. And from that moment the road began not as escape, but as confrontation, because Elias did not turn her towards some hidden kindness or gentle horizon, but led her straight through the brutal arithmetic of Delos, signing papers, settling accounts, enduring the leers and muttered judgments of men who measured worth only in obedience. And as they rode out under the white burn of noon, Althea realized that freedom was not a door flung open, but a series of choices walked through with eyes wide, and Elias rode ahead without looking back, giving her space she did not trust, his silence louder than threats. And for days they traveled through land that seemed to punish movement itself, scrub, and stone and wind that scraped the skin raw. And in that harshness truth surfaced, because Elias did not touch her, did not speak ownership into her body. Instead, speaking of a ranch burned by raiders, of a sister taken and never returned, of a debt he carried not to God or law but to memory. And Althea listened, her own scars answering his, recognizing in his restraint not mercy, but discipline, forged by loss. And when they reached his land, it was not a paradise, but a working place, fences, needing mending, water hauled by hand, nights cold enough to make bones ache, and Elias set terms that felt unreal in their simplicity. She would work, she would be paid, she could leave when she chose, the iron ring removed from her wrist, not with ceremony, but with a quiet clink that echoed louder than the auction bell ever had. And Althea cried then, not the broken sobs of the market, but the deep, shaking release of someone who had carried too much too long. And the days that followed tested her in new ways, because survival without chains still demanded strength, still demanded choice. And there were nights when the memory of Delos rose up like a fever, and she would wake gasping, only to find Elias sitting outside, keeping watch not over her but over the land. And slowly, something like trust grew fragile as new grass, watered by shared labor and unspoken respect. And when trouble came, as it always did in a land that rewarded cruelty, it came wearing badges and lies, men claiming authority they did not earn, seeking to reclaim what the market had sold. And in that moment, Althea understood destiny, not as fate, but as decision, because she stood beside Elias, rifle in her hands, fear burning bright but no longer ruling. And she spoke not as property reclaimed, but as a woman choosing her ground. And the standoff ended not in bloodshed, but in retreat. The would-be enforcers turned away by a resolve they could not price, and in the quiet aftermath, Althea felt the last threads of Delos loosen their grip, because she had not been rescued, she had reclaimed herself, and the road ahead remained uncertain. Love blooming, not as a sudden blaze, but as a slow, earned warmth. Regret softened by purpose. Sacrifice given meaning by choice. And as seasons turned, the ranch became a place where others passed through. Broken souls finding work and dignity. A quiet rebellion against a world built on chains. And Althea's story did not end with erasure or martyrdom, but with endurance. With the understanding that survival itself could be an act of defiance. And as her voice carries now across time, told in firelight and wind, let it remind you that even in the darkest markets of human cruelty, there are moments where choice cuts through fate. And if this story moved you, if it stirred something hard and true inside your chest, then stand with us. Subscribe to the Western Tales. And keep these voices alive, because remembering is its own kind of freedom, and every tale shared is a chain broken.